Chairman Markey, Dr. Barrasso, and members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to testify today concerning the prospect of greater energy security, and particularly how the contours of various climate policies are shaping our own domestic energy future and that of our allies. I want to begin by congratulating you, Chairman Markey, for your successful bid to fill the seat vacated by Secretary of State John Kerry. I've had many opportunities through the years to testify before you during your nearly 4 decades of service in the House of Representatives, and I welcome the opportunity to continue that dialogue. For more than 7 years, I have served IER, and before that, I held several management positions at the Energy Information Administration, including as acting administrator. In all that time, neither energy analysts at EIA nor policymakers in the U.S. Congress were able to predict the transformation of America's domestic energy frontier that occurred over the last few years. For decades, U.S. energy policy had been guided by the ever-elusive quest for diminishing energy resources. Our allies around the world also felt the squeeze of perceived energy scarcity. Meanwhile, climate alarm intensified a political push for renewable energy. Data now exists to examine the effects of these policies, both on the climate and on the economies of the nations who adopted aggressive agendas for decarbonization. Over the course of the last decade, countries across the European Union have pursued the specter of a green energy future with unparalleled enthusiasm. Through various tax measures, taxpayer-funded subsidies, mandates, surcharges, and feed-in tariffs, our allies across the Atlantic have provided us an instructive lesson. Today, industrial electricity prices in the EU are 2 to 5 times higher than in the United States. According to the European Commission, electricity prices in Europe have risen 37% more than those in the United States when indexed against 2005 prices. By 2020, as many as 1.4 million additional European households are expected to be in what some analysts refer to as energy poverty. The EU system of cap and trade, a variation of which narrowly passed the U.S. House of Representatives in June 2009 but never became law, has proven fertile terrain for fraudsters, tax cheats, market manipulators, and various cyber criminals who exploit the inherent weaknesses of carbon trading schemes. According to the market analysts at Bloomberg, as much as 7% of the total carbon market is based on fraudulent trading in a given year. Additionally, some of our European allies are now facing the steep decline of their economies and a dramatic rise in their unemployment rolls as they struggle under a heavy green energy burden. In Spain, for each megawatt of wind energy installed, more than 4 jobs were lost. For each megawatt of solar, nearly 13 jobs were lost. And in the past 7 years, Spain's unemployment rate has jumped from 9% to more than 25%. Fortunately, Spain's policymakers are trying to stop the hemorrhage that their quest for green energy has exacerbated. Wind and solar cannot sustain a growing, vibrant economy. These technologies do not create long-term jobs, and they cannot supply reliable electricity when consumers need it most. In Germany, where utilities have been ordered to generate 50% of their electricity from renewable sources by 2030, the EU's largest economy is now risking what their own energy minister called deindustrialization. Germany's green energy agenda, phase out of its nuclear units, and restrictions on development of its domestic resources have resulted in high electricity prices, dependence on Russia for natural gas supplies, and in increased greenhouse gas emissions. In the UK, nearly 1/5 of the nation's population is now in energy poverty, up from 6% just a decade ago. In Australia, where a short-lived carbon tax threatened to set the world's 12th largest economy back decades, the government has repealed it to mitigate the harm caused by a tax that neither helped the environment nor the economy. The policies of these countries have followed a similar pattern. The government passes ambitious green energy laws, electricity rates rise as subsidies increase out of control, job losses pile up, and the government is forced to consider amending or repealing its misguided policies. Europe's green energy policies have contributed to its economic slowdown, where Europe is now unable to meet its minimal NATO commitments to fund defense. And because Russia is an important energy supplier, Europe is increasingly reluctant to act against aggression. The United States must not follow a similar course. The bright horizon of America's domestic energy future is not guaranteed, and policymakers should temper their enthusiasm for renewables with the real-world facts, now observed with undeniable effects for those who have pursued the green energy dream. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hutzler. Good to see you again. She didn't say that she agreed with me on everything, but
in Europe, including Germany, Spain, United Kingdom, Italy. Would you like to elaborate further on these examples, or are there other examples not included in your testimony that you could highlight for us?
Certainly. As I mentioned, in each of these cases, the government enacted green energy laws. And in order to get the mandates that they wanted, they had to subsidize these technologies to a great extent. That increased electricity prices, it hurt their economies, and they lost jobs. So they ended up amending or repealing some of these laws. The specifics of the different policies are different across the countries. But essentially, like Germany had their residential customers pay more for the subsidies than their industrial customers. They were protecting some of them. In Spain, the government actually took up some of the difference in the subsidies because they didn't get enough money from the consumers. And in fact, since 2000, Spain paid $41 billion more for the power that they received than their consumers actually paid for them. So that puts them pretty much into national debt. But in each of these cases, what we see happening is that they're slashing these subsidies. And in Germany's case, they're trying to spread the subsidies over more of the businesses rather than just the residential customers.
And can you tell me how successful the Kyoto Protocol was in making countries that signed the treaty more energy independent and secure from countries or foreign entities that didn't share their strategic interests?
Well, I don't think that they are more energy independent and secure. It's just the opposite. If you take a look at their energy prices, their electricity price, for instance, as I mentioned, is 37% higher than the U.S. price indexed to 2005 levels. So their policies, in fact, have hurt them. And in one case that I mentioned, they're actually spending less on defense now than they did prior to the Kyoto Protocol. They're spending only 1.6% of their GDP. NATO guidance says that they should be spending 2%, and they were spending as much as 2.5%. And in fact, Secretary of Defense Hengel has called on the EU to spend more because of the crisis in the Ukraine.
Well, that's what I heard when I was in Latvia and Lithuania, that the concerns are that they're supposed to try to get to 2%, but they're unable to, and a lot of it has to do with the expenses that you've outlined. And you mentioned them specifically in your report when you talk about the impact on the economies that they're having to not have the available funds to spend on defense, which is putting a specific additional stress on NATO. You know, if the United States had adopted a cap-and-trade system, do you think it would have helped or hurt our strategic interests?
Well, I personally think that they would hurt them because of the same thing that happened in the European Union. And in fact, you can take a look at Australia, who just repealed its carbon tax because it was not globally competitive. Electricity prices increased 15%, unemployment went down 10%, and it just made them not globally competitive, which is an important part of being energy secure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was an interesting discussion and then decision in Australia to repeal because of the specific impacts of it on the economy. So, anything else that you've kind of gained from that Australian decision?
I find it very interesting that it was just in place for 2 years, and they recognized this. Their citizens were very unhappy about the fact that they couldn't compete globally.
Okay. Thank you.